Spring 2026. Flights are grounded. Cargo ships sit idle. Inflation rates hit unseen numbers. Global supply chains have stopped. This animated chart shows global oil prices in early 2026. Look at the right side of the graph. Prices abruptly spike past $120 a barrel. Energy markets are in total shock, driving up the cost of nearly every manufactured good on Earth. This total economic paralysis was triggered by a conflict lasting just 6 weeks, contained almost entirely within the Middle East. The 40-day collapse of global trade was the culmination of a regional friction burning since the mid-20th century. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated a coup to depose Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. His primary offense was attempting to nationalize the country's vast oil reserves, taking control away from Western corporations. That intervention installed a monarch friendly to the West, but it also planted deep-seated resentment across the country. Decades later, that anger boiled over into the 1979 Islamic Revolution, replacing the monarchy with a strict anti-Western theocracy led by Ayatollah Khomeini. The relationship between Washington and Tehran completely collapsed. Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy, holding dozens of Americans hostage for over a year. Throughout the 1980s, the U.S. retaliated by heavily supporting Iraq in its brutal, decade-long war against Iran. Finding itself surrounded by heavily armed U.S.-backed rivals, Iran adopted a new survival strategy. They built the Axis of Resistance, a wide network of allied militant groups strategically positioned across Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. For a brief moment in 2015, a nuclear agreement known as the JCPOA capped Iran's nuclear program in exchange for economic relief. But in 2018, the Trump administration withdrew from the deal, reinstating severe, maximum pressure sanctions designed to cripple the Iranian economy. Stripping away the diplomatic framework left both sides with very few off-ramps. Washington was strangling Tehran financially, and Tehran was accelerating its nuclear capabilities. The two nations were locked onto a violent collision course. By late 2025, the pressure inside Iran was severe. The government faced massive domestic protests and responded with extreme violence, killing thousands of civilians as they struggled to maintain control of the streets. While the world focused on the internal crackdowns, international inspectors raised a major red flag. Iran was rapidly enriching uranium, shrinking the time frame needed to build a viable nuclear weapon to almost nothing. For Israel, an Iranian nuclear weapon was a hard line. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took newly gathered intelligence directly to Washington, forcefully lobbying President Trump for an immediate joint military intervention. The proposed military campaign, dubbed Operation Epic Fury, had two distinct objectives. First, physically destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Second, eliminate the supreme leadership and force a collapse of the regime entirely. After 70 years of proxy conflicts and economic warfare, the calculus in Washington and Jerusalem shifted. The perceived danger of waiting for Iran to build a bomb finally outweighed the catastrophic costs of starting a war. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel initiated major combat operations. The opening salvo was a massive shock and awe campaign across Iran, punctuated by a targeted airstrike that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Tehran's retaliation was instant. Within hours, the Iranian military launched hundreds of ballistic missiles and armed drones, striking targets across Israel, American military bases in Iraq and Syria, and neighboring Gulf Arab states. The violence rapidly spilled across borders. Iran activated its axis of resistance, and heavily armed militias, most notably Hezbollah in Lebanon, began firing intensely into northern Israel. A targeted operation had quickly spiraled into a multi-front war. By the third week of fighting, the rules of engagement disintegrated. Both coalitions moved beyond military targets and began hammering civilian infrastructure. Missiles rained down on major residential centers and critical oil depots, blanketing capitals in toxic black smoke. U.S. planners initially designed the operation as a swift, surgical decapitation strike. Instead, the conflict mutated into a sprawling regional conflict. Moving into Week 4, the military conflict expanded into direct economic warfare. Iranian forces explicitly began targeting commercial tankers and shipping vessels attempting to navigate the Persian Gulf, severing one of the world's most vital trade arteries. Tension hit a peak when an American F-15 fighter jet was shot down deep inside hostile Iranian territory. The U.S. military executed a massive, high-risk special forces operation to rescue the stranded pilot, narrowly avoiding a massive ground troop engagement. In early April, Israeli forces obliterated Iran's largest petrochemical plant. Simultaneously, leaders in both Washington and Tehran began exchanging apocalyptic threats, openly hinting at the use of non-conventional weapons. Facing complete industrial collapse and the real possibility of a nuclear exchange, the momentum broke. On April 8th, a temporary ceasefire took effect. Both sides realized they were hurtling toward mutual destruction with no viable exit strategy. The bombs stopped falling on April 8th. But for the rest of the world, the true economic shockwaves were only just beginning to crest. The war exposed a massive, systemic vulnerability in the global economy. By choking off narrow bodies of water like the Strait of Hormuz, the conflict effectively blockaded the maritime transit routes that supply the planet's energy. This animated map illustrates how that geographic strangulation works. As the flow of oil stops in the Middle East, financial pain radiates outward. The sudden spike in transportation costs triggered localized recessions and sent food prices soaring across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. When the smoke cleared, the U.S. and Israel had successfully degraded thousands of military assets and missile launchers. But the primary objective, total regime change in Tehran, failed. The Iranian government survived the onslaught. In 2026, a regional clash over 70-year-old grudges had frozen the gears of the entire global economy in just 6 weeks.